All right. Hey, everybody. This is your host, Chris Baker. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Today's special guest is none other than Daniel. How do you say it? Is it
Lettenberger-Klein.
Klein? Lettenberger-Klein. Okay. And it's just, where do I simply start for here? It's just an honor just to have you on the show, to get you out of your busy schedule. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right. Let's just jump right into this. Let's start from the very beginning. Where does this start off for you? Where did you grow up at?
I grew up in a town called Northbrook, Illinois, about 25, 30 minutes north of Chicago. I grew up outside Chicago and lived there until I went off to college.
Nice. Now, is this before the technology age? Are you running around with a cell phone in your hand?
No. I mean, I think I got my first cell phone probably later in high school, and it was those like 10 cent for every text cell phones, the Virgin wireless, the old ones. But yeah, I definitely did not grow up with. We always had computers in the house. My dad was pretty insistent that we have lots of that type of technology, but cell phones, there was no social media. Like my first Facebook I had in college, and I was at one of the schools that allowed or that had a Facebook presence before it was everybody. It was just a few universities. So I was like in that range.
Break it down to me a little bit. How was it going from your childhood without like cell phones or anything, computers, and going into the technology age where you got laptops? You said yourself you got phones, and you had to pay the 10 cents, or you got I think it was also free at certain time of night.
Yeah, after 9. Yeah. I think I liked it until I didn't like it anymore. So for me, like technology is a gift and a curse, right? In the world I live in, connection is everything. And the definition of connection is different for a lot of people. I think the technology allowed us to connect with more people faster in more ways at greater distances, but it also changed what connection meant and how people could actually connect and feel a real meaningful relationship. So technology has been helps me do my job a lot better, but also requires me to be incredibly strategic with how I spend my time so that I can be with people in person, because ultimately that's what makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. For the younger generation that is actually listening right now, and they're not quite sure, how did we live without phones? What did you do as a child? What was going on in your childhood?
I was outside. I mean, I wasn't even like a video game kid. I just played sports. So for me, it was just being active, being out on the go. I was always doing something. I like to organize people and like do different things, and like just, I was gone. It was really that it was just like being with a friend, being out on bikes, going like playing baseball, playing football. So for me, I remember just having the landline and having the old like tapes in the answering machines, and having payphones that we would use if we needed to get in touch with our parents. And I don't remember my parents ever being concerned that they couldn't get a hold of me. It was that I didn't come home when I was supposed to, not that they couldn't get a hold of me. So it was a whole different thing.
Yeah, back in the days where you actually had to use the street lights.
Yeah.
That was time to go home.
Yeah. It was great. I mean, it was a different time. There were different, safety issues then. I got little kids now, and it's, I can't even imagine them being out the way I was out.
Can you imagine? Thinking about it, well, we had it good though. I'll say that. At least my childhood was where, as soon as the street lights we were very like close enough in the neighborhood that we could actually hear mom or dad calling and tell us to come on back home. It's supper time or what, or as soon as the street lights came on, it was time to get home.
Yeah, I grew up in a town of probably 30,000. It's not little, but it's not big. It was definitely suburban, and my house, and my parents still live in that house, was on like a major road. So I wasn't in the middle of a neighborhood. I had to go to my friends' houses to be in the middle of a neighborhood. So I was always a pretty good visible rule follower. So Yeah, if I was supposed to be home, I was home. I was never late. Never late.
Wait.
I was
So wait,
raised
you're telling
raised
me
on the road.
you never got grounded?
Oh, I got grounded, but not for being late.
So
I got grounded for, I was raised by my dad's a Vietnam vet Marine. So uh, there was a lot of just towing the line and doing, mine was usually grade related. I did not love school. I was not passionate about it. I didn't do great with it. So my underperforming tended to be academically.
let's get more into that. Let's talk about that. What was your schooling experience like?
Um, well, it really varied over time. So early on, I went to grew up in a place that was very affluent, even though we were not. And so that was a unique challenge in an academic setting. Our school was, had a ton of tax dollars behind it. So it was a really, really good public school. It's still known as a phenomenal college prep public school. And so I I don't think I ever really academically fit in too much. There were just a lot of high achieving people. And I didn't feel overly confident in my ability to do it. So I would be more likely not to do it. And so, I was somebody who would ask questions before trying because I ultimately I was probably manipulating and trying to build relationships so I could get out of doing whatever I was trying to do or what I didn't want to do. But yeah, school was not easy for me. I didn't find success with school until I got to college.
So you said you played sports as a kid. Did you
Yeah.
play in any in high school at all?
A little bit. I played baseball and wrestled at the beginning of high school. I did not like wrestling, but needed something to do during the winters. So I wrestled for a few years. I played baseball for a few years, but I'm only like 5'6", and you get to a point where like height matters when it comes to high school sports, especially baseball. I was a first baseman, so I'm left-handed, and I was also starting to work. I started working when I was like inform like babysitting at like 10, but like actually a like tax paying job probably when I was 13 or 14. And so it was always way more important for me to be working than anything else. And it also coincided with my height becoming an impediment to continuing to play sports. So I just started working, steadily when I was 14, 15, and just focused on working and going to school.
You're preaching to the choir, man. I think when I first got into high school, I was like 4'6" as a freshman before I hit my
Ah,
growth spurt.
there you go. Yeah.
And then, of course, playing football, you had like the shoulder pads and everything on, and that made me about 3'5".
Yeah. And I played football for like 4 years before high school, but I had like broken my tailbone, cracked a rib, broken it. I had fractured my wrist at one point. It just wasn't for me.
You're like, I'm good. I've
Yeah.
done enough, man. I don't want to be injured no more.
Yeah.
I did. I played football throughout high school,
Hmm.
and then I did a little bit of wrestling because I was built for it. And plus, growing up in the '90s, that's what it was all about, man.
Yeah.
Stone Cold, The Rock, Big Show, all them
Yeah.
guys, Triple H. Everybody was in the backyard doing backyard wrestling.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But when
Big
you
J-
got into like
Yeah.
actual wrestling, you're kind of like, whoa, wait a minute, this ain't like
Uh,
how it was and how I see on TV.
no one looks great in a singlet. Like it just is not for anybody. And it was definitely that era where we were doing like the breaking the fluorescent light bulbs over each other's, but
Hitting the chairs, doing flips
yeah,
off the damn roof.
it was a jackass culture. That's what it was.
And then, yeah, at the same time, that was actually becoming popular too. The
Hmm.
Jackass movies were coming out, the whole
Yeah,
series.
yeah,
So everybody wanted to do like dumb things. Like, let's hurt ourselves while recording it.
yeah. That was awesome. It was fun.
So, working in high school, did you know right away what you wanted to do with your life, or when did you know
No,
that in stone?
I had no idea what I wanted to do initially. I mean, my first job, uh, my grandmother worked at a toy store, and my first job was behind every gift on the shelf were wrapped versions of that gift. And so my job was to wrap all of those gifts in the back. So I was always alone and I was wrapping gifts, and I am horrible at wrapping. Like, it's not a skill set I have whatsoever. I definitely didn't have the patience for it. I was also like 14, 15. Like, I was terrible at it. And so I'd get paper cuts. I'd get frustrated. I would like not do it evenly and they'd make me redo it. I was making like probably at that time, like $4.75 an hour. Right. So it was
Unheard
like
of nowadays.
not worth it. And it was terrible. So after that, I worked at a hardware store and a grocery store. And really liked the hardware. My dad had a True Value hardware store when I was really little for a little bit. And so growing up around that, I liked that a lot. But I think I got interested first in like dentistry, which was weird. My great uncle was a dentist down in Atlanta and had always been my dentist. So every time we went down to Atlanta every year for Thanksgiving and throughout the year, he would take care of my teeth. And in high school, I got braces on my junior year, and obviously he was my orthodontist, and so I would work in the dental office in between. Every time I would go, I'd do the x-rays. He would teach me how to sanitize everything, and so I started working on my own braces in high school. So in between, I'd cut my own. I'd cut the wire. I would adjust as I could, and just take care of them. And so I actually decided I was going to go to college. I was going to do pre-dental work and then try to become a dentist. And that did not last long, but that was my original intention. I had an 8 a.m. organic chemistry course my freshman year, first semester, in the basement. I went to a university called Bradley University. It was in the basement of their oldest building. It was like August, so it was like sweltering down there. The teacher was like 8.5 months pregnant from Turkey, so I couldn't understand, like, the accent was thick. I was like fresh into college. It was hot. I was uncomfortable, and I wasn't a great student, so I was like learning how to like show up. I was like, I have to show up, but it was like, it made me go, maybe I don't want to do this. What do I want to do? And I went to my advisor at the time, and the first thing he does, I still remember, this is very motivating to me still this day. He looked at my ACT scores and like grades and stuff, and he said, well, you shouldn't, what do you want to do? And so like he said, just do general studies, like start in general studies, and just figure it out from there. And I said, well, I think we got to the point where we talked about psychology. And because I had taken like an intro psych course at that point. And he said, well, yeah, just be thoughtful though, because like based off of how you've done, you're not going to get into grad school. So you need to just like think about what you want to do after college, because there's no way you're going to get the grades to go to grad school. And I was like, okay. I mean, at that point I accepted that, and I was just like, I was pissed off, but I didn't disagree with him. I had nothing else to show that I could do it. And so I just went about it and did psychology and sociology as a minor, and just took as many different courses as I could. And yeah, kind of went from there.
Now, what would you say, like, during that period, what attracted you to that study?
Psychology. I was always kind of the person who fixed things in my house, and with friend groups. I was always in the middle of it. I had actually grown up, I don't know how old you are, but you said 90s kid. Like I grew up listening to Loveline. So Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla. I had gone to bed to Loveline from the time I was 9 years old all the way through college. Every night I listened to Loveline. So addiction medicine and relationships. And so I just had been exposed to a lot of stuff. I grew up in a household where there was addiction. I grew up in a family where there was active addiction. And so I was exposed to a lot of stuff, in extended family as well. And so I was just like very curious about the human condition and how people operated. And I had always been very nosy, naturally very curious, and as a means to like control my environment. And so it just seemed to be like an entry point in college, but also something I really started getting very interested in I loved abnormal psychology and understanding how to diagnose and how to conceptualize everything. And then sociology really put a big picture for me of understanding like culture, and thinking systemically, which is ultimately what I think drove me towards success in the graduate program I went to, which was a systemic program. So
Now play it out in our heads. Now that you were studying this, were you having everybody come to your dorm room
no,
that had issues? What was going on?
no, I was never the helper of everybody. I was just an observer of people more than anything else, I would say. I do think that I have always been pretty good in a crisis. So I would say I was definitely the person that my friends would look to deal with anything that was happening in the moment that we needed to get out of the middle of the fire. Um, but I don't think anybody looked to me for advice. I don't think that was a role I played necessarily. I was just good at dealing with hard situations. And so, yeah, it was more for me like just, I didn't know what I was going to do with it. Honestly, I thought I was just going to go and work at like Nationwide and be like a financial, like everybody does like these insurance or like cold call your family to get 40 clients. I thought I'd end up at like, you know, um, just a basic entry level job. I didn't know what I would do after graduation.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't have really a plan until I was a senior, and I applied for a few jobs, and I did not like it. It was also 2008, right? So like there was a huge meltdown happening. Like it wasn't like job prospects were huge at that point. Like there was a lot of uncertainty. Um, and so, being around my professors, I was like, well, maybe I want to do this. Maybe I want to do, it was a class I still remember I had a professor who I would uh, go to his house. We'd have cigars and drink scotch. And like, it was such a cool environment as like an undergrad to like go and do this and like talk about marriage and family therapy. And so I had never heard of it really. And then this class was all about like family work. I still have the original textbook up here somewhere. It's like called Fighting for Your Marriage. And we read it in there. Um, and so I think he was the first person who really helped me. Uh, Dr. Randall, Kevin Randall, he was the first person who really helped me understand that like I might be interested and good at doing that type of work. And so I was like determined to become a clinical psychologist at that point. Like everybody in school is like, I'll be a clinical psychologist because I think that's like the thing you do. So I started applying to what's called a PsyD program, which is a doctorate of psychology, clinical psychology, more clinically focused programs. And I went through all my professors and had gotten my letters of recommendation. And one of my professors, Marjorie Getz, she was incredible, and her husband had been the head of like I went to China for a class to study Eastern religion, and so like her husband was Dr. Getz was the one who led that class. So like I had this really good relationship with the Getz family, and she refused to do my letter of support. And I was like, why? Why won't you? She had already said she'd write me a letter. She said, because you're too smart to go to a for-profit school. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like,
Come
just,
on.
yeah. And she said, I'll do a letter for you, but not until you go figure out how to get paid to go to school. And I had like a quick meltdown of like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because all these PsyD programs were like Adler, and I didn't know they were like for-profit universities. I didn't know enough at that time. So I went back to my psychology advisor, who was the chair of the department at the time. And she's like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to sit in a chair with angry couples and talk to them. Like I just want to sit with and do couples therapy the rest of my life. And she said, well, what about marriage and family therapy? And I had never heard of a graduate program in that. I also had a girlfriend at the time who was at a local school at the University of Illinois. So I was like, maybe I'll go to a graduate school there and we can be together. And thank God that, that didn't happen, because it would have been a totally different like future for me. I ended up meeting my wife at graduate school. So
Wow.
I applied to a few different schools. The only one I didn't get into was the one my girlfriend at the time had been going to. So I think it's kind of like meant to be that it all happened that way. But so I applied to a few different schools and said I would figure out how to go to. I had put myself through school just with loans and scholarships and working the whole time. I was a lifeguard, worked in the psychology department all over. And that's what I'd been working for in high school too, to save up to pay for college. And I went to the school that gave me the most money. It was like a simple equation for me. And I got incredibly lucky. I got invited to Purdue, which I was like, why am I here? Like, so I was one of 22 finalists at Purdue that they accepted into the master's program, only 9 people a year. Wow. And it was a 3-year program where they take only 9 people. And they did that intentionally, not just so they could like have like really meaningful discussion and work and theory and research, but they were able to guarantee a full ride for all 9 students. Wow. And so I remember sitting in the room being like, I do not belong here. Like, you guys made a huge mistake letting me into this room.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. I was like, something's gone wrong. These people are incredible. The people around the table talking about the research they did. And I did get to do some psycholinguistic research as a head research assistant in undergrad. And so I remember all throughout grad school at Purdue, I would ask the professors, I would say, why did you let me in? Why did you let me in? And they would never answer me very intentionally so I could figure it out. But like, and I remember they said, if you get in, we're going to call you tomorrow and let you know. And so it was like horrifying. I remember going back to school and getting the phone call the next day and just shaking. Because I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this just happened. And so I ended up at Purdue.
Wow. And then hold on, pause for a minute. Let's think about this. Like, you went into college wanted to be pretty much, you wanted to work on teeth. And then midway through you changed it all up.
Yeah.
And found yourself, wanted to help people out mentally, so they could recover from whatever they're going through and help them with their problems. And then you get lucky enough that you get to be numbered, out of the 9 students at Purdue, you got chosen.
Yeah.
And like you said, it was destiny. And as it worked out, that's how you met your wife.
Yeah. We were actually roommates before we ever started dating. I was the only guy that got in my year. So I lived with 3 women. So over half, 4 of us were, a little less than half of us were in one house. And yeah, so it just so happened that we lived together for probably a year before we started dating. We were both dating other people and broke up with our significant others around the same time and did not like each other at all.
That's usually how it goes.
That's usually could not stand each other. And I believe that that's because there's a fine line between love and hate. Yeah, so it was a very interesting time in my life.
So let's dig more into it. Now you're at Purdue.
Yep.
And how is life going for you there?
Good. I mean, it was the first time I had felt like true. I had definitely gotten some confidence in college. Like just felt like I could pass tests consistently. Like I knew how to study at that point. I knew how to like consume content. I knew that I had interests. I knew that I liked to explore, that I was like very curious, and that the way for me to be okay was to like lean into that side of me. Also I knew I was super hungry because I had grown up in an environment where I had always looked at everybody else that had, and I didn't feel like I had, even though my parents did a great job of making sure we had what we needed. Being in a place filled with people that have far more, ultimately you're always looking at what's shiny and what you don't have. And so I got to Purdue feeling shaky and uncertain and confident because I didn't think I belonged there. I didn't think I'd be able to do what was going to be asked of me. I remember being just horrified that like I couldn't do it, that they had gotten the wrong person, really that like imposter syndrome piece. And for me, it was just about like letting that be the process. Like I leaned into it. I did the reading. I forced myself to do the reading. I didn't want to do all the I just like learned how to do the thing, because if I wasn't doing the thing, what did that mean for me? So I think it was really putting on like the afterburners. Knowing school was not naturally easy for me would require me to show up differently. And I really leaned on my classmates. You know, I would not have gotten through that program without the cohort of people around me to say like, to edit my papers. I was not a great writer. I was not. I had interesting ideas, but to turn that into something that was a publishable paper was not a skill set I had. So I really relied on my classmates to make me better. And luckily, I was fortunate to have some really supportive, sharp people around me that were willing to do the work to help me get to, you know, not where they were. They were still light years ahead, but to a place where I could be successful. And really where I found my footing was doing the clinical work. That was, I think, where I pulled, where I started to shine, because, you know, the reading and the writing I could do okay. I was never going to be a superstar at that. But what I did know how to do was work. And what I was going to do was show up more often, consistently, and do more of it, because I knew how to like keep my head down and I just do more of it. And it also felt really good to do the work. So, I mean, I think in that 3-year master's program, I ended up with more clinical hours than nearly anybody who had ever been through there. And so face-to-face time, I think I did something like 900 clinical hours in a graduate level clinical program, when most require, you know, 400 or 500 to graduate. It was just where I felt like I was good at something finally. Yeah.
Now, would you say in the beginning, because you kept saying, like when you first got there, you just felt like I'm not supposed to be here? You know, like you said, the imposter syndrome. Now, for somebody that, you know, that's listening or watching right now, kind of going through a similar belief, how did you get over that feeling?
Outside validation. I don't think I'll ever fully be there. I experienced a lot of success very early after graduate school. So while that was a blessing in so many ways, it was also a curse, because it just kept going, where I
You
was
just
like,
kept going up, yeah.
should I be here? Like, are you guys sure? Is everybody sure that this is where I'm
Is
supposed
this
to
some
go?
prank? Is something
Yeah.
going on here?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it was challenging. It's still challenging to this day. I mean, there's definitely days where I'm thinking about what I don't know more than what I do know. But ultimately, like the thing you learn how to, I think the thing that's essential over your life that dictates whether you're going to be successful at something is how you resource, you know, how you build your resource network, and knowing who to call, knowing who to ask for help, admitting when you don't know. I think a lot of what helped me in those moments of feeling like I didn't fit in was just doing the next right thing. Like recognizing I didn't have to be the best. I didn't have to know best. I didn't have to be the smartest. I just had to do the work. And if you can do the work and ask for help, like ultimately you can accomplish it.
To say that one more time, you have to do the work
You got to
to
do the work. I
accomplish
mean, that's really it. Is that, you know, we're in such a instant gratification culture today, where everybody wants what they think they're entitled to or what they want to have, and being willing to put in the work, I think, makes a big difference. I think understanding of what the work is changing, which is making, I think, very often a younger generation, uh, they're faced with these challenges that they don't know how to navigate, because there is a difference in like parenting style. There's a difference in like how people get what they want in real time that I didn't grow up with. A lot of people didn't grow up with. And so, you know, like I think of my dad, you know, my dad is is a unique individual. When I think of one of my like favorite stories of him, he's still living, but like when I would go to that hardware store with him, I was probably no older than, you know, 4 or 5, maybe. And the first thing he did was give me a paint can full of assorted rusty nails and say, sort them. And that was it. That was sort the nails. There's no way around it. You can't talk your way out of it. You can't half do it. Either you do it or you don't. And so like that was really it to me. It was like if I asked my dad how to spell a word, he didn't tell me how to spell a word. He handed me a dictionary. And
He made you work for
yeah,
it.
if I when I was playing, he had been in a motorcycle accident years ago, so his mobility wasn't great. We'd play catch outside on the deck. If I threw a ball past him, he wasn't going to get it. I was going to get it.
Yeah,
So
you had to go
it's
get it.
like just that mentality of like show up or you're gonna have to keep going.
And then that like forever stayed with you for the rest of your life, and you didn't even realize it because you were just a kid. You're like
Mhm.
you didn't think nothing of it.
Yeah.
But as as we got older, we realized, okay, that's what my dad was doing, or that's what my mom was doing.
Yeah.
Somebody along the lines was teaching
Yeah.
you and pretty much grooming you for life.
Yeah. I mean, I think my mom, my dad taught hard lessons. My mom taught me how to show up. My mom was the one who was working 3 jobs, who was at everything, who cared about everything, that was interested in everything. My dad would show up for some stuff, but he was always tough. My mom was the one that would be talking with me. And I think my like love of being around people talking was because I felt safest when I was younger, like being around my mom and her friends and just listening to them talk. I wasn't talking with them, but like being around that. And my mom's always really valued friendship in a different way than my dad has. And so I think watching her connect with people, care for people, show up for people. She was also a caterer and still probably caters now. Um, she was always in service to people. Like she was always doing something for somebody else to her own detriment at times. And so I think that like that servanthood, that servant leadership that she did is really what modeled for me that like, yeah, it can be hard. It can be really hard, but you just keep doing the things.
So you had that standard setting in, like after you graduated.
Yeah.
Like how long was it before you found your home, your place?
After graduating Purdue.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear you. It broke out for a second. You said after graduating Purdue.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, once you graduated from Purdue, what was your next step?
Well, my wife and I were engaged at that point. So we were really deciding what was next. So most of the people that went to the program I went to went on to get their PhD. I hated school, right? It was not for me. I was like, I'm just going to do the clinical work. I found that I'm good at that. I don't want anything to do with a PhD program. That sounds miserable. And my wife is brilliant and exceptional at nearly everything she does and has an uncanny ability to focus and do anything. And so she knew she was going to go on to get her PhD. So really, we kind of plugged into that same equation of what's the best school you can get into that's going to give you the most money.
Mhm.
And she had her pick of a number of different schools, and which was incredible. And so we ended up down in Tallahassee, Florida State, where she got her PhD in marriage and family therapy. So really, it was following my wife, my fiance at the time, to the next best thing. For us, it's always kind of been like leaning into the next best opportunity. And for us at that time, it was between like Manhattan, Kansas. I think Kansas State was a program, and in Minneapolis, and so Tallahassee is where we ended up, and actually with a few classmates too, because a lot of people from Purdue ended up going down to Tallahassee because they had one of the top doctoral programs in the country. And Purdue was one of the top master's programs in the country. So it was like a natural pipeline. And so my job at that point, before we left, we had a friend, Dr. Priest, Jacob Priest, who is a year ahead of us in school, had been there, and he was still is a great friend. And so I said, can I come down and stay with you while I look for a job and build and like get set up? And
Mhm.
so I remember going down there. I actually told this story recently. I went down, I slept on his couch and started building a private practice because I got approved supervision through I joined a private practice doing in-home therapy for open Department of Children and Families cases, like diversion cases for parents who were going to potentially lose their kids. I had found this practice with the marriage and family therapist that she owned. And so I slept on his couch as I built up a practice, because I remember when I drove into town that day, I stopped to I went to a restaurant called Tomahawk right on the main strip, and I had $17 in my bank account. I remember like talking to my wife, her name's Cassandra. I was like, like, I can't afford like the fries with this, right? Like this is just what we had. And like, getting down there, and even before that, like when we were our first apartment together, and my kids play in a sleeping bag that we have right now that we've had for years. It was my wife's. They always want to have it out and like play on the floor and sleep with it. And we tell them like that sleeping bag was actually our heat, because there were times in grad school we couldn't afford to like have the heat on. So we would just sleep with all of our blankets on the bed under the sleeping bag in this little 700 square foot apartment. We both had other jobs. I was a bartender. She worked at like a Texas Roadhouse, and we both were teaching courses at Purdue. So like she came from a family, somewhat similarly positioned as mine, where you just had to kind of like be scrappy and figure it out. And she's very, very resourceful and good at making sure and that she's caring for herself. So it was a phenomenal partner to have in all that. So got down to Tallahassee. And as soon as I think our moms came down with Cassandra to move her down, and I got a phone call for the first, for a salaried position at the largest provider of addiction treatment services in the Big Bend region. That's what they call that area in Tallahassee. It's called Disc Village. And they offered me, they said, come in for an interview. So I said, that's amazing. We had a wedding to pay for, and we didn't really have much help from our families. So I knew we had to pay for a wedding. And so I went in for that interview, and they liked me, and they gave me two options. Either I could become an outpatient counselor at this downtown Tallahassee one, which like wasn't really my skill set yet. It was a lot of like homeless inner city. Like I did not have that skill set yet, but they said, or you can become the lead outpatient counselor for this it was 50 miles outside of Tallahassee in a town called Perry, Florida, become the lead outpatient counselor, and you could get $1,500 more, and we'll give you a car, because it was 50 miles each way. And I said, I'll do that. But like, I say this all the time, and I know people don't always like it, but I came out of one of the best master's degree programs in the country, into an area where there weren't a lot of graduate degreed clinicians. And my first job, I was making like $31,000 a year with a master's degree, doing this work. Like it is not easy in the behavioral and the social sciences and the health, healthcare field to like monetize your degrees unless you know where to go and you get those opportunities. So I started working that job. It just so happened that I also did a ton of the in-home counseling in the same town that I had an office in. And so my wife was at school from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. So I would work 13-hour days. I would head out at 5 a.m. I would see one or two of the clients before I'd start my workday. I'd do a 10-hour workday because I would do 4 10s. And my lunch break, I would see another client in the community. And then after work, I would go see a few more and then drive back and do it all again. And so I did that for a few years. And then I decided to open my own practice. So I opened my own private practice. I was working at that addiction treatment program and for another private practice as a contracted therapist. At probably 2 years into that position, a family therapist position. I was a trained marriage and family therapist. So I didn't want to be doing outpatient addiction counseling. I didn't know how to do that. Like I was just trying to figure that out. And a family therapist job opened up on the main like residential program, which was 15 miles south of Tallahassee. And I immediately reached out and applied for that and got that. And so I started working as the family therapist for an adolescent male addiction treatment program that was like, I would say 6 to 9 months long on average. These kids were in drug court, 14 to 19 years old, court mandated to be there. And I was responsible for working with them and their families. And a lot of their families would drop them off on day one and pick them up 9 months later. They wouldn't even show up.
Wow.
But these were kids from like, really rough circumstances, just really horrendous poverty and just really difficult situations, horribly abusive situations. And so that was on one side of the campus. On the other side of the campus, they took care of women, and mostly women that had dependent children. And so I was a family therapist for both programs. I would go back and forth. I would run multifamily groups. I would work one-on-one with people, with their significant others. I would work with them and their families. And I would still go out to Perry to do all the in-home work, and this is like a kid from the suburbs of Chicago going to trailers in the backwoods in rural Florida. It was a different world entirely. I would have to, when I would get home back to our apartment, I would have to like strip down outside and leave my briefcase. You couldn't bring your briefcase into the homes of many of these clients because you get cockroaches that would come in.
Oh yeah.
The smell, it would be so overwhelming. Like I'd walk into some of them and just the exposure to like severe trauma and neglect was overwhelming. I'd have kids like pulling at my car door to come with me.
Take us with you.
Yeah, it was awful. Just whole systems that had been abusive, incestual, just it was a totally different world. And so the next piece for me was that the women in the residential program, they weren't getting better. Like they kept coming back. And this was probably 12 years ago, maybe a little less, at least a decade ago. At the time in like some of these community-based behavioral health centers, there weren't a lot of like graduate level clinicians doing the work. It was really lay-led or like, peer-led, and they were doing exceptional work. But there was also very little knowledge about like trauma-informed care. It was really starting to become a buzzword. And so I asked them to send me to the Humanitarian Assistance Program, which was HAP training for EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which at the time was like the number one empirically validated form of treatment for PTSD in the military. And so I learned EMDR and I started doing it with the women at the residential program, and they started getting better. And like things were changing and like we were seeing a difference. And so I then started doing it in my own private practice and had a supervisor for EMDR, which is how I ended up in Atlanta after that, which I imagine we'll talk about. And then I said, there's nowhere for these clients to go after they leave, to continue the family work that we're doing, like to work. I would work with the kids. I would work with everybody. And so I assume it was a lot of, white male privilege and being bold enough to ask. But I went to the COO at the time and I said, I would like an increase, or I'm going to go to this other place that just made me an offer to do structural family therapy. And I said, the difference I'm being offered is the difference in a down payment on a house eventually. And he said, well, what do you want? I said, I want you to let me build an outpatient mental health center. And so they gave me a building and they let me hire staff. I wrote all the policies and procedures. I built this, it was called Family Counseling Services. I hired all of the doctoral students in my wife's program because I knew they were the best research-informed clinicians who had never been paid for clinical care ever. So I was right next to the Medicaid office. So I got a Medicaid contract that paid like $70 a session. And we paid the clinicians $25 an hour. They thought they were over the moon because they had no idea. So it was a great margin. And the clients that were leaving the residential program could continue their family work with us. And I just saw the gap. And so at that point, the stipulation from my boss then was, okay, you can open this outpatient mental health center, but you still need to be the family therapist at the program. So I was doing my own private practice, still doing in-home therapy, built this outpatient mental health center, and was a family therapist on this management team at the program. And it was nearing the time for my wife to graduate, and so we had the game plan for what was next. Do you have anything you want to ask me about that, or do you want me to keep going?
I'll just keep on going. Keep on
All right. And so we knew we didn't. Well, my wife is from Lorraine, up here, and me being from Chicago, we knew we didn't want to be back up in the snow. Being the young, healthy people we thought that we were, we thought being far away from our, our families of origin was probably the healthiest thing for our separation and our like growing a family together. And so we decided to move to Atlanta because my grandmother had, my grandmother and that side of the family are Holocaust survivors. And so my grandmother had grown up in Atlanta. And I had a lot of extended family and had been going there for years every Thanksgiving, had a ton of cousins there that I was close with. So it seemed like a natural fit. My supervisor for EMDR had supervised someone many years earlier that had a thriving practice in what was called East Cobb, Georgia, which is like Marietta, a suburb of Atlanta. And so she said, just go up, talk to him. He's charging $250 a session, $250 an hour. Like, this guy's crushing it. Go talk to him and just find out if he has any leads for you, like people you should talk to about a job, what you want to do. And so I went up on a Saturday and had like an hour scheduled with him. We spent like 4 or 5 hours together. And at the end of the conversation, he said, I'd love to give you some names, but I'd rather you work here. And I said, okay. I don't know if there's room for me here. And he said, I'll renovate the office. And I said, okay. And so he literally changed it was a group practice. He built out another office so that I could have my own office in there. It was incredible. His name is Spencer Galenter, Dr. Galenter. He was incredible. And so again, like I had with going down to Tallahassee, I knew that to build a practice as a 1099 employee, it was going to take time. You don't just walk in with that. And so Sunday evenings, I would drive the 5.5 hours up to Atlanta and do my practice up there. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And Thursday, I would drive back down to Tallahassee to do the private practice I had built there. I left the family counseling services. I left the family therapy job and the contracted job, and I just kept my own private practice. It was just a cash business. And so I would do both practices, and I did that for 10 months, driving back and forth until my wife graduated. And then she came up. She worked for a summer at Mercer University. She finished her PhD in like 3 years, which was amazing. And we moved in with my aunt. I was staying with my aunt all those 10 months, my great aunt. And she was kind enough to let me and my wife and our dogs stay with her. And it was at that time that I found out that 1099 employees can't get a mortgage unless you show 2 years of consistent income. And I was like, well, I paid for college, like we paid for a wedding, like we made that work. How are we going to pay for a house if I don't have a salaried position?
Yeah.
And so at the same time, I got recruited by a company called Sunrise Detox to be a clinical director, executive director, service director. It was kind of just to run a facility, a detox, that I had never worked in that level of care before, but they really needed my licensure to be able to operate in a new state. And they saw that I had done, the recruiter at least had seen that I had done some of this program development with that family counseling services. And so they offered me the job, and it was wild. And I was not qualified other than my licensure, but they felt very confident they could train. So as soon as my wife had moved up, after 10 months of being apart most of the week, I started traveling for 2 to 3 months. I would fly out at 5:45 on Monday mornings and fly back Friday nights. That was part of the deal, is I could come back every weekend. But I started flying down to Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach every week. And so we did this like strategic hiring process where I did every job in the building. They were headquartered in West Palm Beach, but they were building their first one in Alpharetta, Georgia. And they wanted me to make sure I knew how to operate every job, because there was no, I was it. I was the person who was going to oversee it. And so I did everything. I did the pickups, I did admissions. The only thing I really didn't do was pass medications. That was just for the nurse. But I was doing everything else. I was cooking. I was learning about the ins and outs of how to operate it. And so all that time, that was probably in the late summer, early fall of 2014. And then we bought a house. Then that's when the facility opened. I think the facility opened in like February of 2015. And so I did that for a bit. It was a 27-bed detox. This was the first time I had been in the for-profit sector, really, or a corporation, for-profit corporation. And I started getting utilized across the other facilities. And so I would get flown down at least once a week, if not more, to some of the other facilities to train the clinical directors on documentation. And so in the probably first 2 years, I became a Southeast Regional Service Director is what it was called. And my responsibility was shared with another service director that we oversaw opening an Orlando facility, the operation of Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach facilities, Atlanta. And then I would also travel up and do all the crisis intervention training for 3 detoxes in New Jersey. So I was traveling quite a bit. My wife and I were having a ton of fertility issues at that time as well, and did not think we were going to be able to have kids. We had been married 5 years at that point. Really, it was hard. And so we had tried a form of treatment that didn't work. And then we met with this doctor who owned a practice. And she said, let me try IVF one time. You guys are only 30 years old. Let me try one egg. You have unexplained infertility. Give it a try. And so we did. And we came back in to check because the test had come back positive, and the egg had split, and we had identical twins. Yeah. And so I'm doing this job where I'm like working all hours, texting all hours. Like, I would not say our marriage was exactly where it is today or where it should have been, because I didn't have healthy boundaries yet at all. I was just so like committed to being successful and doing the next thing that I didn't know how to be a
yeah, imagine in that time period. I mean, you just had a lot going on. She had a lot going on.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You can only imagine what was going on in the household.
Oh, yeah. And she joined a private practice in Atlanta, but also got a job where she's still at today. It was called North Central University at the time. I think she started out as an adjunct faculty teaching doctoral level students in marriage and family therapy. Today, she's the senior director of training and education for National University, over like 6 different graduate level, master's and doctoral level clinical programs. So her career was taking off in that time too. So yeah, we found out that Cassandra was pregnant with the twins, and at 20, it was a high risk pregnancy because it's identical twins. So starting at 12 weeks, every week we were in checking the blood flow, because one of my daughters had what's called intrauterine growth restriction, which means they had unequal amounts of the placenta. And so really watching that, and at 25 weeks pregnant, they were concerned about blood flow. So they put my wife in the hospital. So she was on permanent bed rest at 25 weeks pregnant. And so she was still working remotely every day, like knocking it out, crushing it. But she
on bed rest.
working on permanent bed rest with these like compression things going on her legs to keep the blood flow going. She's a champ. And so the girls were born at 31 weeks, so 2 months early. And luckily we were at Emory Hospital in Johns Creek, Georgia. This level 3 NICU, I think it is, was 7 minutes from our front door. So it couldn't have been like a better place, but I was like home alone with the dog every night. And she was there for a little over a month. And then the girls were born, and the girls were in the NICU for a month. And as soon as we found out that my wife was pregnant, actually, before she gave birth, I got recruited to another company. And so I changed jobs. And I went to a company called Rivermend Health, which I don't believe exists anymore. I think it's been sold off for its pieces and parts. It was a private equity backed healthcare venture that did eating disorders and addiction treatment. And my initial job was just to run an outpatient office, which was open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. I was like, this is going to be incredible. I can be home every night for dinner. I can be, especially with Cassandra having the kids, like I can be the dad I want to be. I can show up for my wife the way I want to. And one of the first mandates I got, they said, open a second treatment center right next door, and we're going to do a beta test for an in-network facility. So, a Jew from Chicago, but like opening up a Christian facility in Atlanta was the idea that we had. So we opened a Christian facility in the Bible Belt, and it was great. And we like learned how to do it and figured it out. It was wonderful. But also in that same time, I ended up being asked, the girls were 2 months old at the time. So they had only been out of the NICU a month. Something happened with the executive director of the facilities 2.5 hours away, and I was asked to step in. And so my quiet little 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, turned into overseeing the entire state of Georgia, which was every level of care, inpatient, outpatient, but it also meant driving 2.5 hours away to Augusta from Atlanta nearly every week for a while until it stabilized. And so from the time the girls were 2 months old till 5 months old, every Sunday afternoon, we would get into a rented minivan and drive to a hotel in Augusta, Georgia. And sometimes they'd let me fly my mother-in-law in, and my wife and the girls and my mother-in-law would stay in a hotel in Augusta, Georgia, Monday through Thursday or Friday every week while I worked. And we did that for 3 months. And I also, around the same time, decided to go back and get my MBA because I was like, we don't have enough on our plate. I was in, talking with like the CFO and the CEO who was mentoring me because at that point I had decided I wanted to be a COO one day. And I couldn't understand the language. Having the like clinical background, they asked me to do a pro forma. I was like, what is a pro forma? I had no idea. And so I decided to go back to school because where Cassandra was working, I could go for free. And so went back and got an MBA. And in that time, so this was like 2018, we had been going through a restructuring. And I had been through restructurings at the previous company. I had a fair amount of knowledge about it. I was obviously studying change management in my degree program and different models for organizational structure. So I kind of saw what we were doing. We'd hit a lot of our numbers, but we had never really been a very profitable. I don't think we'd ever lived up to what the intention of the private equity group had envisioned for us. So they were starting to think about, offloading different pieces and parts. And we hit our numbers, things were good. And then it turns out I had a good relationship with the CEO. I get a call and he says, I'm going to have to let you go tomorrow. Just a heads up. And I was like, okay. I had been talking to recruiters for 6 months at that point. Like I was getting recruitment calls a lot and wasn't sure what I wanted to do, was still very committed to chasing shiny stuff. And the next dollar mattered and the next dollar mattered. And so I ended up getting, let go, which was the first time I had ever been let go from a job. As an adult, it was my first time dealing with that. They'd given me a few months severance to like figure it out. And, but I had always been recruited to the next thing or found the next thing pretty easily or had too many things on my plate. Now I just had school and 2 twins that weren't even one. And at the same time about that I was getting restructured out of a job, we found out my wife was pregnant.
Oh man. So it seems like every time it's always perfect timing.
Yeah. So the girls weren't even 2. we didn't think we could naturally get pregnant, that my wife could get pregnant. But apparently when you have a child, your body changes. And so she was pregnant. I was working on school, looking for jobs. Girls aren't even two, living not near our immediate families, with some help from extended family for sure. But, kind of on an island. And so 6 days after I had lost that job, something on LinkedIn popped up for a place called Dyson Company, which is in Shaker Heights here. And I talked to Susan Zach was her name, this recruiter there. And I ended up getting recruited for Stella Maris, this small nonprofit in Cleveland. I didn't tell my wife right away because I knew she didn't want to come back to Cleveland. And so, yeah, I did something that was very like outside of my character at the time. I said, consider me a local candidate. I know this is nuts, but like there's reasons for us to come back up here. I also at the same time was starting to get recruited by a company out of Cincinnati. And so I did some consulting for them and was coming up here to Stella Maris, and like I did this like secret interview in Shaker over like the Thanksgiving holiday in 2018. And I don't think anybody was over the moon about me on the board of directors. I had come from medically managed treatment programs, and Stella Maris is the oldest addiction treatment program in Ohio, and has historically always been abstinence-based, which means they don't use different forms of medication in recovery that a lot of other treatment centers use. And so I was a little bit different. I was much younger than historically they had in a leadership role, and they hadn't had somebody that came from the addiction treatment space or a clinician. And so I was not sure I would get the job. And I ended up getting flown back up for a second interview to meet the leadership team here and some other board members. And I came on campus, and it was like the first time I was horrified I wouldn't get a job. And I hear like the entitlement and the privilege in that, but like I had never like wanted for a job as badly as I wanted for this one, just because like there's something different here. It's like the campus, the Stella Maris, there's nothing else like it. I've been, when I was at the last company, I was consulting in Malibu. I was, I was working with the executives in Chicago. I was working in, I was all over the place. I had never been to a place like Stella Maris, which was only like a $4.5 million budget, taking care of 95% of the population was at or below the poverty line. And so it was a totally different clientele. The last residential program I oversaw was about $50,000 a month. So going from like a high-end luxury, we have horses on site, pillow top mattresses, rain showers, and TVs in the room, to like this person is just trying to figure out how they eat today. It was like a totally different. And
that was a wake-up call.
Totally. And for me, like I had been so I really struggled in that for-profit space just because of some other like difficult management styles, and not the last company, but actually the last two companies, I struggled with some of the really executive leadership and the way they conceptualize just treating people, and the rooms very rarely were we talking about how do people get well? How are the people doing? It was, what are the numbers? And for me, with like that clinician soul, like it was really challenging for me. It almost felt at times like human trafficking, right? Like it was ultimately just a head in the bed. It wasn't about how that head in the bed is feeling. And so this was like the first place I feel like I got passionate about doing this again. I was thinking about like switching industries altogether or going into like hospital administration or something. And this place is like unlike anything else. So this has been a dream job for me.
So as we begin to wrap this thing up, I just want to simply say thank you for coming on and telling your story and sharing with us.
Yeah.
You're pretty much, it seems like you landed in the right spot every time. This always seemed perfect timing. But where you're at currently right now, and say somebody wants to get help, wants to get recovery, how do they get in touch with you guys?
So I would say, obviously you can always just use the internet. It started with social media and technology. Now you can end with it. You can always find us online. But our main number for Stella Maris, we can give that out to. So we're at 1320 Washington Avenue in downtown Cleveland. We're in Ohio City, same block since 1948. We're unique in that we have every level of care on one block. So most people are with us 5 or 6 months. You can check. We're at stellamariscleveland.com, or you can call our main line at 216-727-2055 if you need help. Yeah, that's it's a neat place. Nothing else like it.
Now, for the people that want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, same email address. I mean, anybody's welcome to reach out to me. I'm happy to help. I just recently, in the last year, I really try to focus on civic engagement and getting involved, and have done. I'm really fortunate to be involved with a program called College Now. So I have a few mentees and all that neat stuff, which has been amazing. So I'm absolutely open to talking with anybody, helping however I can. I don't know how much my story impacts or helps whatsoever, but I think that resourcing piece is key. And Cleveland has been incredibly kind to me in the almost 5 years I've been here now. So any way I can give that back to the community, I want to.
You could probably help that person land them in the right position, the right time, right place. But other than that, that's the only question I got left for you. Just want to simply say it once again. Thank you. And then for the people that are watching and listening right now, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Until next time, this is your host, Chris Baker. That's Daniel. You just heard his story. Peace out.